The day I married Adrian Blackwood, he had no idea I already knew the truth. He thought I was the quiet woman who fell into his life by accident. But what he didn't know was that 8 years earlier, he had signed off on a decision that destroyed my father. I didn't marry him for love. I didn't marry him for money either. I married him to watch his empire collapse from the inside. And here's the part nobody expects. He fell in love with me anyway. They say revenge doesn't bring peace. That it leaves you empty and cold. That's a lie. Revenge gives you purpose, until it starts asking for more than you plan to give. Because if you're hearing this story, then you already know how it ends. I married the man who ruined my life. And I walked away smiling. But the part nobody knows is what it cost me to get there. The first time I saw Adrian Blackwood in person, I wasn't supposed to be alive. I was standing at the back of a crowded courtroom, wearing a borrowed blazer and shoes half a size too big, listening as a judge calmly explained why my father's death would remain a closed case. No negligence. No foul play. No further investigation. Just like that. One sentence, and my father was reduced to paperwork. Adrian Blackwood sat in the front row. Not as a defendant. Not as a suspect. As a witness. He didn't look relieved. Didn't look nervous either. He just looked bored. Like a man waiting for traffic to clear. I watched him stand, adjust his cufflinks, and shake hands with the same lawyers who had spent weeks dismantling my father's reputation. When his eyes met mine, just for half a second, he frowned. Not in recognition. In irritation. As if my grief was an inconvenience he hadn't scheduled. That was the moment I decided something. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't fight him head-on. I would become unforgettable. 8 years later, the internet called him the most eligible billionaire in the country. Cold. Untouchable. Brilliant. They loved the story of the orphan prodigy who built an empire from nothing. They didn't love the story of the auditor who jumped from the 26th floor after uncovering fraud tied to Blackwood Industries. That story never trended. But I remembered everything. Which is why, when Adrian Blackwood walked into that charity gala and stopped mid-step because he'd noticed me, I knew the plan was working. I didn't look at him right away. That matters. Men like Adrian are used to attention being immediate, desperate, loud. I gave him none of it. I laughed softly at something my date said. Not too loud, not fake. And took a slow sip of champagne. Only then did I turn. Our eyes met. And this time, he didn't look irritated. He looked curious. Dangerously so. You're not like the others, he said later, when he finally cornered me near the balcony. That line usually makes women laugh. I let it hang in the air instead. Neither are you, I replied, gently. But you already know that. That was strike one. Strike two was walking away first. Strike three was disappearing for 3 weeks. When we met again, it felt inevitable. Like gravity. Adrian didn't court women. He acquired them. But with me, he hesitated. Asked questions. Listened. I told him just enough truth to make my lies believable. Yes, my father was dead. Yes, it had been sudden. No, I didn't like to talk about it. Sympathy softened him. Mystery sharpened his interest. And I let him believe he was the one in control. The proposal came 6 months later. No ring. No speech. Just a folder placed between us on a marble table. A marriage contract, he said calmly. 2 years. Public appearances. Absolute discretion. I didn't open it right away. Why me? I asked. He studied me for a moment. Then said something that made my stomach drop. Because you wouldn't love me, he said. And that makes you safe. I almost laughed. I almost cried. Instead, I nodded. Fine, I said. But I have one condition. His eyebrow lifted. Name it. Full access, I said softly. To everything. He agreed without hesitation. That should have warned me. Marriage to Adrian Blackwood was quieter than I expected. No shouting. No jealousy. Just rules. He didn't touch me. Didn't pry. Didn't pretend. At night, the house echoed. And during the day, I went to work. Not as his wife. As his shadow. I memorized schedules. Passwords. Faces. I learned who lied, who drank too much, who panicked under pressure. And slowly, the pieces came together. Shell companies. False audits. Buried reports. My father's name appeared everywhere. And then, one night, I found something else. A video file. Timestamped 2 days before my father died. I almost didn't open it. I wish I hadn't. Because it wasn't evidence of murder. It was worse. It was proof of indifference. My father sat across from Adrian in a glass office, hands shaking, voice breaking as he explained what he'd uncovered. Adrian listened. Nodded. And then said, calmly, "This will ruin a lot of people." My father replied, "The truth always does." Adrian leaned back. And smiled. "I'm sorry," he said. "I won't stop it." The video ended there. No threats. No violence. Just a decision. I sat in the dark for a long time after that. My chest hurt. Not with rage. With something far more dangerous. Doubt. Because the next morning, Adrian brought me coffee in bed. Black. No sugar. The way I liked it. And for the first time since the courtroom, I wondered what would happen. If revenge wasn't the end of the story. And that question terrified me. I didn't confront him. Not after watching that video. Not after realizing the man who destroyed my father's life was the same man who knew exactly how I took my coffee. That morning, I smiled. I thanked him. I kissed his cheek. And then I went downstairs and locked myself in the bathroom so I could throw up quietly. Because this was never supposed to get complicated. I wasn't here to understand him. I wasn't here to humanize him. I was here to end him. A week later, I learned something else. Adrian Blackwood was being watched. Not by the police. Not by the media. By his own board. The same men who toasted him in public were quietly preparing to cut his throat. I found it buried in an encrypted folder labeled contingencies. Emails. Side meetings. Contingency plans. They weren't afraid of his crimes. They were afraid of me. Because access was power. And I had too much of it. That's when I realized something chilling. If I moved too fast, they wouldn't just destroy Adrian. They'd destroy me too. That night, Adrian broke one of his own rules. He came into my room. No knock. No warning. He stood there for a long moment, hands in his pockets, like he was debating something he'd already lost. "Do you hate me?" he asked suddenly. I looked up from my book. "No," I said. That wasn't a lie. It also wasn't the truth. He nodded, as if that answer confirmed something for him. "You're the only person in this house who doesn't want anything from me," he said quietly. I almost told him. I almost ended everything right there. Instead, I asked, "Why did you marry me?" His jaw tightened. "Because I needed someone who couldn't be bought," he said. "Someone I could trust." I felt my heart stumble. Because I was bought. I was bought by grief. By rage. By 8 years of waiting. And the man standing in front of me had no idea. If you're still listening to this story, pause for just a second. Because what happened next changed everything. And if you don't want to miss how this ends, go ahead and subscribe now. Trust me. You'll want to hear the rest. 2 days later, the first body fell. Not literally. Financially. One of Adrian's closest executives was arrested for fraud he didn't commit. The charges were airtight. Too airtight. Someone had planted evidence. I recognized the structure immediately. It was my work. Or a perfect copy of it. That's when it hit me. I wasn't the only one playing a long game. Someone inside the company knew what I was doing. And they were using my research to start a war. The media turned overnight. Headlines shifted. Blackwood Empire cracks. Internal betrayal at the top. Is the CEO losing control? Adrian worked longer hours. Slept less. He stopped bringing me coffee. Stopped asking questions. The house went cold again. But this time, it wasn't comfortable silence. It was the kind that comes before an explosion. I confronted the board member I trusted least. Marcus Hale. Old money. Fake smile. Eyes that never softened. "You're moving too fast," I said quietly, meeting him in the underground garage. He chuckled. "You sound like Adrian." "I sound like someone who knows what you're doing," I replied. His smile faded. "You think you're special," he said calmly. "You think marrying him made you untouchable." He stepped closer. "You're not the hunter," he whispered. "You're the leverage." That was when I knew. They weren't planning to destroy Adrian. They were planning to sacrifice him. And frame me as the motive. The grieving wife. The gold digger with a tragic past. The perfect villain. That night, I packed a bag. Not to run. To prepare. I copied everything. Every file. Every email. Every recording. Including the video of my father. And then I did the one thing my plan had never accounted for. I told Adrian the truth. Not all of it. Just enough. "They're moving against you," I said, placing the drive in his hand. He didn't look surprised. He looked relieved. "I know," he said quietly. "I just didn't know when." I stared at him. "You're not angry?" "At the board?" he asked. "No. I expected it." "Not at me?" I pressed. He met my eyes. "I married you because you wouldn't love me," he said softly. But somewhere along the way, I forgot what that felt like. My chest burned. I almost told him everything. Again. But the moment shattered when his phone rang. His expression changed as he listened. Then he looked at me. And for the first time since I'd known him, he looked afraid. "They have a warrant," he said quietly. "For my arrest." The next 48 hours were chaos. Adrian was taken in front of cameras. I stood by his side, silent, composed. The internet did what it always does. They tore us apart. Some called me loyal. Others called me calculated. No one called me innocent. And then they found the files. Not mine. Altered ones. With my fingerprints all over them. I watched my reflection on TV screens as reporters speculated. The wife may be more involved than we thought. That's when I realized the truth. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was survival. And if I didn't make a choice soon, I would lose him. And myself. At the same time, I visited Adrian in custody the next morning. We sat across from each other, separated by glass. "I never meant for this to happen," I said. He smiled faintly. "I know," he replied. "You don't," I whispered. But before I could say more, the guard knocked. Time was up. As I stood to leave, Adrian said one last thing. "If you have to choose," he said quietly, "choose yourself." I didn't answer. Because I already knew. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the drive in my hands, replaying one truth over and over again. I hadn't married Adrian Blackwood for money. I hadn't married him for status. I married him because 8 years ago, my father uncovered a system designed to crush men like him, and Adrian chose to protect that system instead. My father died not because Adrian hated him, but because Adrian decided he was expendable. That was the revenge. Not blood. Not screaming. Exposure. I wanted Adrian to live long enough to watch everything he built collapse under the weight of the truth he buried. That was the plan. Until love ruined it. The kiss happened by accident. Those are always the worst ones. I went back to the house after leaving the detention center. The silence felt hostile now. I poured a drink I didn't want and stood in Adrian's office, staring at the city like it might give me answers. Then I felt him. His presence. I turned too fast. He was standing there. Free. Tie gone. Eyes hollow. Jaw tight. "They released me on bail," he said quietly. I didn't ask how. I didn't ask who pulled strings. I walked toward him without thinking. "You should have run," I said. "So should you," he replied. We stood too close. Close enough to feel the tension vibrating between us, years of restraint cracking under pressure. "I saw the files," he said. "The real ones." My breath caught. "You knew?" I whispered. "I know now," he said. "About your father." Silence. Heavy. Loaded. "I watched him beg you," I said, voice shaking despite my effort to stay calm. "You listened. And you did nothing." He didn't deny it. "I thought the system was bigger than one man," he said quietly. "I told myself sacrifices were necessary." I laughed softly. "That's what people say right before they ruin someone's life." He stepped closer. "And what did you tell yourself?" he asked. "When you married me?" I swallowed. "That you deserved to lose everything," I said. "That watching you fall would bring my father back." His hand came up slowly, and stopped just short of touching my face. "And did it?" he asked. "No," I whispered. "It made me see you." That was when he kissed me. Not gently. Not carefully. Like a man who knew this might be the last time he was allowed to want anything. I kissed him back. And hated myself for how much I needed it. Because the truth was brutal. I loved the man. And still wanted justice. The next morning, the trap closed. The board made their move. Marcus Hale called an emergency meeting. I listened from the hallway as they spoke about Adrian like he was already dead. "He's unstable. He's compromised. The wife is a liability." That was when I understood the full scope of my revenge. The board didn't kill my father. They created the world that made his death acceptable. Adrian was just the blade. They were the hand. So I changed the target. I went public. Not with anger. With precision. I leaked everything, but not to the press. To regulators. To international watchdogs. To people who didn't care about headlines, only proof. Shell companies collapsed overnight. Accounts froze. Men who had laughed at my father's desperation began calling lawyers in panic. And then Marcus Hale did something stupid. He tried to kill the story. He framed Adrian again. This time with evidence that could never be undone. Unless someone destroyed the source. That someone was me. The confrontation happened in Marcus's penthouse. Glass walls. Too much light. Nowhere to hide. "You don't understand the game you're playing," Marcus said calmly. "You think this is about your father?" "It always was," I replied. "You married Adrian to hurt him," Marcus sneered. "And now you're protecting him." "No," I said softly. "I'm finishing what my father started." He laughed. And then I pressed play. The video. Not just of my father. But of Marcus authorizing cover-ups. Silencing whistleblowers. Ordering evidence destroyed. His face drained of color. "You can't release that," he said. "It'll destroy everything." I smiled. "That's the point." Marcus was arrested within hours. The board followed. Blackwood Industries collapsed so fast it made history. Adrian stood beside me as the world burned. Not as a king. As a man stripped of power. "I never wanted to survive this," he said quietly. "I just didn't want you to be buried with me." I looked at him. "At some point," I said, "you stopped being my revenge, and became my choice." He nodded. "And you?" he asked. "I became my father's daughter," I replied. "And my own woman." That night, we didn't make love. We talked. About guilt. About consequences. About what forgiveness actually costs. And when he kissed me again, it wasn't desperate. It was earned. But the story wasn't over yet. Because revenge has a final rule no one talks about. Once you take everything from someone else, you have to decide what kind of life you want to live afterward. The world didn't end when Blackwood Industries collapsed. It just went quiet. Too quiet. No cameras outside the gates anymore. No headlines screaming our names. No one asking how it felt to watch a dynasty fall. Adrian and I stayed in the house for days, moving around each other like survivors of the same wreck, unsure which pieces were still sharp. He no longer wore suits. I no longer checked exits. For the first time since the courtroom 8 years ago, there was nothing chasing me. And that scared me more than revenge ever had. On the fourth night, Adrian finally broke. He stood in the kitchen, staring at his hands like he didn't recognize them. "I don't know who I am without it," he said quietly. "Without the power. Without the fear he commanded. Without the machine he'd protected at the cost of a man's life." "You're not the worst thing you've done," I said. He laughed bitterly. "That's easy to say when you're not the one who chose silence." I walked closer. "And it's easy to hide behind guilt when you're afraid to change," I replied. He looked up. Really looked at me. "You didn't forgive me," he said slowly. "You outgrew your need to punish me." That was the moment I knew we might survive this. Because love built on denial never lasts. But love built on truth has teeth. We left the city a week later. No press release. No farewell. Just 2 suitcases and a quiet decision. The coast was empty where we settled. No guards. No gates. Just the sound of waves and mornings that didn't ask anything of us. Adrian learned how to live without control. I learned how to live without revenge. Some nights were still hard. Some nights, he woke up shaking. Some nights, I dreamed of my father and woke up angry all over again. But we stayed. We talked. We didn't pretend healing was linear. The letter came 3 months later. An official envelope. The kind that once would have terrified me. Inside was a ruling. My father's case, reopened. Not because of media pressure. Not because of pity. Because the truth finally had nowhere left to hide. I went to the courthouse alone this time. Adrian waited outside. I stood in the same room where everything had been taken from me, and watched as the record changed. Not suicide. Wrongful death. Corporate negligence. My father's name cleared. I didn't cry. I breathed. For the first time in 8 years. I breathed. When I walked outside, Adrian didn't speak. He just opened his arms. And I let myself fall into them. Not because I needed him to save me. But because I wanted him beside me. There's a difference. The proposal didn't come with a ring. It came with a question. We were sitting on the porch one evening, the sky bleeding orange into the sea. "I won't ask you to forget," Adrian said quietly. "And I won't ask you to forgive what I haven't earned." I turned to him. "But if you choose to stay," he continued, "it won't be because of guilt, or revenge. Or what we survived." He swallowed. "It'll be because you see a future here. With me." I studied his face. The man who once decided my father was expendable. The man who lost everything. The man who chose to change when power was no longer an option. "I'm not choosing you because you're redeemed," I said. "I'm choosing you because you're accountable." He nodded. That was enough. We married quietly. No contracts. No clauses. Just vows that didn't pretend the past didn't exist. "I promised to never choose convenience over conscience again," he said. "I promised something too. I promised not to weaponize my pain, even when it would be easier." It wasn't romantic. It was real. And real lasts longer. Sometimes people still recognize him. Sometimes they whisper. Sometimes they judge. We let them. Because the loudest kind of peace is the kind you don't need to defend. Adrian started teaching ethics. Corporate accountability. The irony isn't lost on either of us. And me? I tell stories. Not for revenge. But for memory. Because silence is how men like my father disappear. And truth is how they stay alive. If you're wondering whether I regret it. Marrying the man who helped destroy my family. Loving him. Saving him. The answer is complicated. I regret the world that made my father expendable. I regret the version of Adrian who believed power excused anything. But I don't regret choosing a future that didn't end in ashes. Because revenge ends stories. Redemption lets them continue. So here's the question I'll leave you with. If the person who broke you truly changed, would you choose justice? Or would you choose love? And if you had to choose both, would you be brave enough to pay the price? If this story held you until the end, you already know the answer. And maybe that's what makes us dangerous. And if this story stayed with you, you already know why you should subscribe.